Good morning. I am Reva with Quality Sewing and Vacuum. I'm so excited that you're here. This is going to be a really fun topic. We're going to talk about creating binding, bias binding, things like that. So all things that way. Now, in the next couple of Tuesday morning lives that we're going to do, we're also going to talk about sewing on binding with feet. And then we're going to do one on the attachments too. So this is kind of like a little mini series. So it should be fun. So if you have questions, make sure you ask, because we want to make sure that we get you the answers that you are looking for. So first of all, what on earth would you use binding for, or what is binding? Binding is taking strips of fabric, and you may use that to bind the edge or finish the raw edges of a quilt. Okay? You may use binding or strips to do a project like this. Our backpack here has binding finishing the raw edges, and a lot of tote bags and bag patterns will actually have you finish the inside raw edges using binding as well. Okay, and then I have another piece of binding I want to share with you, and this is same type of idea, but a little bit of a different application, and that is something called a Hong Kong finish, and that is a bound seam. So you'll find this in high-end garments, or if you're doing something with sheer fabric and you want to make sure that you have a nice finished edge, but something that's pretty. It's lovely inside an unlined coat or jacket, because you can use a contrasting fabric to create a bound edge, which again covers that raw edge of fabric so it can't fray, and it just looks awesome, right? So we're going to talk about how you create these different types of bindings. And bindings can be wide or they can be narrow. So you notice this one's really tiny. This one is wider. So they're all different depending on what you want to use them for. So we're going to look at several different ways to go ahead and make a binding strip. Okay. Before we get there, because we're going to talk about regular straight strips and bias strips. Now, a straight strip, let me show you that. I'm going to pull this off to the side just for a little bit there for a second. A straight strip would be cut from yardage. So this is just a scrap, but I think you can get the idea. It goes on the bolt this way. And so if you just want to do a straight strip of fabric, you can simply use, I'll use the longer one here. You can use your rotary cutter or scissors or whatever you want to use, and you can cut and make straight strips for binding or for a Hong Kong finish, whatever you want to do. And then when you use this on your project, you have the grain going this way. Can you see how that does that? So this is one way to do it. Now, a straight of grain piece is very stable. Okay, it has a little bit of stretch because you're going across grain, so it has a little bit of stretch. And when I say cross grain, let me just grab a bolt right here and show you. When this is woven, you see the selvage? This is the length of grain. Going from selvage to selvage is the straight of grain. So if I'm going the length of grain, it doesn't really stretch at all. But if you go cross grain, it has a little bit of give. And that's just the nature of woven fabrics. Okay? So let's just set this down here and let's look at that for a minute. So we have our straight of grain here, and this is perfectly wonderful. But if you were to put it on a quilt, which this is too narrow to really put on a quilt, but if you're going to, you have your threads that weave the fabric going this way and going this way. That's why it's stable. Okay, you with me on that one? Okay, now let's talk about bias. Bias would be when you take your fabric. So you notice I have my selvage here, right? So I cut this strip off of the end here. Bias will go at a 45-degree angle, and it has a huge amount of stretch to it. Okay, so depending on the project that you're working on, you may want to do bias, or you might want to do a straight cut. So if I'm doing a simple quilt like this that has straight edges, a straight cut may be all that I need. If you're doing something like this with a curved edge, you're going to want to do bias because straight fabric will not go around a curve like that. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Okay, so we are going to get into cutting the bias and everything like that, but I just wanted to share with you what the difference between straight of grain, right? Straight of grain and bias. So if this were on the quilt, and we're going to cut this into bias here in a minute, but if this was on the quilt, take a look at the difference. It has this really fun diagonal look to it, whereas if I use straight of grain, it would be straight. Okay, so you might choose to use bias to turn your stripe fabric into a fun diagonal for your binding or for a project, and that's fun because it gives a little bit of interest there. So there's different reasons why you might use it. You might use bias because you have something with curves. You might use bias because it looks cute. You know, there's just different reasons for that. Okay, now another reason that you might want to use bias if you're binding a quilt that is straight is because this is a theory that people have. If you look at this quilt or this fabric, remember how the threads go like this way and this way? So if this is on the quilt and you have a folded edge where your binding ends, the curve here, or not curve, but where it folds over, that's on grain. And so there is a theory that can wear, and then it may fray on the edges with a quilt that's being well loved. Okay, if it's on bias, then your threads don't parallel the folded edge, the finished folded edge. They come up to a point. So it's not right on a thread going. Is that making sense at all? You're going against the grain. So it's, instead of having your threads like this, they're going to cross like this. So when it's folded, you're not along one thread. Okay, so then the theory with that is that it's going to be more durable. So you have that. Okay, all right. So now let's talk about different ways to make bias. And I have some other bias strips here, but neither here nor there. If you want to see any of them, let me know. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this. We're all good with this? Okay. I can pick them up if you need to. Okay, so let's look at our piece. This is basically a fat quarter. Now, if you need binding, you can get an amazing amount of bias out of just a fat quarter. And there's places online, there's quilting reference books that you can go in, and then you can figure out how much fabric you need to create your bias, okay? So here's what we're going to do. This is really pretty easy. We want to find our bias. So I'm going to go ahead and fold this. So I have a corner fold here. This was, see my little point? And then I matched it up, okay? Can everybody see that okay? Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to fold that here. And then I'm going to take my handy dandy scissors. Now, this is bias, so it's stretchy, so you don't want to pull excessively. You just want to, I'm just going to set my hand here and gently get into the fold, and I'm going to cut this fold. So now I'll have two pieces of fabric. Okay. These scissors cut like butter. I don't know, do you ever pick up scissors and they just feel so good when you cut? Oh my gosh, I love those. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to flip it around like this, and then we're going to sew along here. Okay, so I'm going to come around to the sewing machine. Excuse me. Now you're going to notice that they don't match up perfect because I didn't cut a perfect amount of fabric, but that's okay. But what I do want to make sure is that the top edges are lined up. Can you see that okay? Okay. Now, if you have any questions, make sure that you ask. Now, I am going to scoop my point up a little bit just so I don't have, I don't want my point down like this because then I'm going to waste all that fabric. So I'm going to pull that up where I know it's going to get into the seam allowance. Now, I'm going to make a wider seam here than you might normally do. Let me make sure my iron stays on because I have the selvage there. And normally you're going to cut that selvage off. Okay. And I am using a handy dandy fun green thread, which is really just designed for you to be able to see. But you at home, you're going to use a thread that matches your fabric nicely. Okay. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to go press that seam open. Okay, now again, if you're making this to make actual bias, you would want to trim that selvage off and make sure you're pressing on a mat. You don't want to press on your cutting mat. That's not good.
So Frances asked, her biggest question is, how is she going to remember all this awesome information later?
Well, Frances, hello, Frances. I haven't seen you for a little bit. Assuming you're the same Frances that I think you are. Anyhow, you can always find this video again, a replay on our YouTube. You can find it on our Facebook channel. So we're there. You can always find us. And heaven's sakes, I guess I can always. If I see you have a question, just let me know. Okay.
Yes, she is that Frances.
Well, hi, Frances. Okay. So, So now what you can do here is you could cut your strips right here because this is bias. And you see how now we've made kind of a parallelogram, right? And so this is our strips. Okay. But we're going to do something even easier. We are going to make continuous bias. And I'm actually going to start with this side because you see how... Let me just trim off this little guy right here. See how this matches up better, and this is kind of wonkadoodle over here. So I'm going to start on this side. So what I'm going to do is I am going to mark our bias, where we want to cut it. If I was doing this and I'm just going to use my rotary cutter, I would just lay down my ruler and I would cut. Lay down my ruler and cut. But I want to make one continuous piece because I don't want to put the pieces together. I will show you how to put individual pieces together. However, I don't want to do that if I don't have to, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark first. Now I am kind of, this is really handy. A lot of bindings are 2.5 inches. So I'm using a 2.5 inch ruler. Yay. So I don't have to think. I can just lay it down the edge. And I am not going to use a friction pen because I want you to see it. This is going to be a cut line, so it's not going to matter that I'm using a ballpoint pen, okay? But in my sewing room, I would probably use a friction pen, but I want you to see what I'm doing here. I want the lines to be really clear.
Elizabeth asked, is this the tube method?
Could be. It does make a tube, but I've never heard it called a tube method, so I don't know. So Elizabeth, you let me know if that's what I'm doing. Okay. So I'm just going to line this up and I'm going to try to be quick about it. And then when I cut this, you're going to see that I'm not a very accurate cutter. I'm just not. I'm just try to be fast. And does anybody else do that? You try to hurry. I know haste makes waste, but there you go. Okay, so there's that one, and I didn't even draw there. So let me redo that line. And this ruler, by the way, this is the yardstick, the 36-inch one, which is really handy. But they also come in 12 and 18 inches. And I think a 24 as well, which is pretty cool. And I love the Quilter Select because it doesn't slip out. You see that little yellow coating is a grippy for for the fabric. Okay, I've got after this one, I think one more line that I can do. And if you're really good and you knew exactly how much you needed, you could probably make sure you had the right size piece fabric before you got there. Okay, so I'm going to leave that little hairy piece on, but I'm probably going to just cut this piece level that way and get rid of that little dog hair here. Okay, so now this is where Elizabeth's going to tell me what I'm doing. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to sew this into a tube. So it very well could be the tube method. But what we're not going to do is try to match up these edges exactly, right? Because let me see if I can get it kind of placed here. If I was to match everything up, line 1 with line 1, line 2 with line 2, I would just end up with a tube that you can't cut apart. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to shift it one way or another. So I'm going to take my line here, my first line and my first line, and I'm going to come down to my second line, and then I'm going to match up my first line with my second line. Okay?
So Lori's asking, how do they know how much fabric to start with?
It's called math. So take a look. If you have a quilting book, like a reference book, a lot of times it will tell you how to figure out how much yardage you need, because it will all depend on how wide you want your strips to be. So depending on what you're working on. Okay, so if you're doing 2.5-inch strips or 3-inch strips, you're going to need more fabric than if you were doing a 1-inch strip. If you're doing straight of grain, you simply need to figure out your 40-inch wide, how many 40-inch strips you need to go all the way around your project. And if you need 10, then you need to cut 10 strips at the width you need. Okay, but bias is a little different. Okay. Now, let me come to the other side so you can see what I'm doing here. So I cannot tell you the math exactly for your specific project, but like I said, those references are available. You can also find yardage calculators and things like that. So what I'm doing here with these pins is I'm looking where this ends, and I'm looking at about a 1/4 inch or so, and I'm going to poke it through there, and then I want to hit my line. See how I didn't hit my line? Right? Because I want to match up the seam allowances, because you're not going to match up the tops. Let me show you why. Okay, so if you were to match the tips of each piece, let me get this open, you're going to see that your line may match, but you can't match them up because one's going to go up and this one's going to go down. So you have to find the intersection where you need the seam to go. That makes sense? Because you want this line to be at the same spot on the other side as well. So you want to match that up. And I do pin this because that was pretty close. Because I want to make sure that it's on when I'm working with it. Okay. This is much easier when you're sitting at your machine. Okay, one more.
So the question was asked that this will be on replay, correct?
Yes, this is recorded, so you can watch it again on YouTube or on our Facebook page. Now, you notice this does not lay flat at all. It just seems so wrong, but it's not. Okay, so what we're going to do is come over to the machine now, and I am going to, oops, he's trying to come undone. So now I'm going to stitch my 1/4 inch seam. All right, and I don't want to sew through my pins. This is a magnetic pin holder, and it's okay to use that with your machine because the magnetic power in a pin cushion is not strong enough to damage your machine in any way. You've probably heard, don't use those. Excuse me. And that comes from the days back when you might have it. The circuitry was very, very sensitive. And I've been told by engineers that do the machines that if you were to put a magnet, you'd have to have a magnet that was strong enough to lift the machine off the table for it to do any damage anymore to the inside workings of your machine.
Elizabeth has a question. Would drawing the seam allowance line help match those points?
Oh, it might. That's a good idea, Elizabeth. I think that might be a really nice idea. I've never thought of that, but it very well might. So give that a try. Okay. All right, so now I've got my wacky line, and you can see it's all stitched there. So now we're going to press this open, which is a little bit of a fun challenge because it's at a weird angle and it's not smooth, right? So I'm going to try to make it as smooth as I can. There we go. And then just get in there and we'll just press it open. I prefer to press mine open so that way when it goes into the project, it's not a bulky seam. If you press both to one side, you have 2 layers of fabric in addition to the main layer. This way you only have 2 total. Okay. All right, so there we go. We've got that pressed. Now comes the magic part. Since we started one, we staggered it here, all we need to do is cut on this line. And I will try to stay on the line. I promise. I'm not good at it, but I'm also going to try to be quick. I won't do the whole thing. I just want you to see how this works. But you're just going to cut and continuously cut on the line. And since we set the lines offset from each other, one will flow into the other, and it becomes like a spiral or a coil. And you just cut and cut and cut, and then you end up with oodles of bias. Okay. Any questions so far? No. Okay. Okay, so then do you get the idea? So I went one time around, and one time around is 32 inches. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 times 32 is 5 times 32. So that's one way you could figure out how many yards we could get from this. Someone get your calculator out and tell us how many yards we're going to get out of this one 20-inch piece of fabric. Okay. Does that make sense, or do I need to keep cutting? Anybody need to see more?
Maybe one more row.
One more row. Okay. I will keep going around. So here, maybe this will be easier to see. But the neat thing about this is that you just keep going. And so you've already stitched all your seams. So they're all pressed. They're all seamed. So you have one total long length of your bias. Okay. Right, almost back to the beginning where we started. Okay, so now we have 2 times round. Okay, so it's really kind of cool because then you don't have to go seam them. Okay.
Lori said it's 160 inches.
Good job, Lori. Thank you, Math Lori. So that's 160 inches. So that's like 3.5 yards, I think. So that's pretty good out of a quarter of a yard of fabric for a fat quarter. That's pretty good, right? Okay, so now let's talk about doing the same thing. And next, after this, I'm going to show you how to join them if you had individual pieces, okay? But here's another fat quarter. But what I did is if you want this on the straight of grain, I've already pre-marked my sections, right? So you could totally take this and do the same thing. And did we find out, is that the tube method? Is that what you were referring to when you said the tube method? Let me know if we're on the same page there. So this one, we can do the same thing. I was like, I lost my pin cushion. Okay, so this one, we want to offset it again, right? To see how they match from one side to another. But I am going to offset it. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, so Francis wanted to know, so you're using an endless, I'm thinking the word was supposed to be like continuous strip. So when you're done cutting that, you just have one.
Yes, Francis, just one big Perkin 100 and what was it, 100 and something inch long piece.
And Lori said, yes, that's the tube method.
Okay, it's a tube method. Okay. Thank you, ladies, for helping me out. Okay, so there's no reason, though, why you can't do the tube method with fabric that's on the straight of grain, right? And if you have more fabric, it's going to be easier. But you could do this, and what the benefit of doing this is going to give you that fabric strip that is continuous, that you do not need to piece the small ends together. How many of you struggle with putting bias strips together and trying to get them to lay right where they need to? It can be a challenge. It can be it can be. Sometimes I do it well, and sometimes like, well, I got to go back to cutting kindergarten, you know. Okay, do you guys want me to stitch this up so you can see how this works? Yes, no?
Hit the like button if you want her to do that.
Yeah.
You said that. You have your
Oh, Carrie's giving me instruction. I'm like, yeah, I agree with that. She says, no, you have to say it because you have the microphone. Okay, so hit your like button or something if you want to see this. See me
lots of thumbs up.
Okay, let's do it real quick. It won't take long. Seriously, what else do we have to do? This is fun. Okay, so I've got it offset. See how it's one strip at the top and it's one strip at the bottom. And I'm just going to stitch that 1/4 inch seam. Whoops, don't do that. I sewed over my pin. Did anybody see that? No one saw that, right? No one saw that happen. And this is actually easier to keep on because it's straight of grain, so it's not as persnickety as bias. Okay. Okay, here's my favorite thing. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. I just kicked you. I'm sorry. My favorite thing about the magnetic pincushion is you can clean up in no time flat. Okay, my scissors are on the other side. So oh, look at that magic. I have a scissor delivery system. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we would press this, right? So it's not all seamy like that, not sticking up. And then we will start trimming along the line. I feel like I should press that. If you agree, give me a thumbs up. I just don't want to waste your time. Okay. I feel like I'm cutting it backwards. Nope, I'm cutting it right. It's because I'm left-handed, so I only think one direction, so this feels very weird to me, going this direction. But that's okay. Okay, so do you get the idea now? So it's just going to spiral all the way around like the other one. Okay, but this is all on straight of grain. Okay? Okay, now just wait. I've got some other cool stuff. How about I show you how to sew regular strips together really fast? Because that's the most boring thing I'm going to show you today because the other stuff is really cool. One thing I do want to mention is that when I'm doing a quilt or a project, I know I need to have binding for it. It's kind of like doing the dishes after you eat. I hate that. I mean, I don't mind making the messy dishes, but I don't like to clean them up. So if you do your dishes as you go along, it's not so bad. Likewise, first thing I do for a project is I cut my binding so it's ready to go. And then I don't have to worry about it. And then this is a tube from like a wrapping paper tube. And I roll it up on that so it stays nice and smooth and pressed. And then it's ready to go. And I actually can sew it on this and it'll just spool off for me. That's just a little fun tip there. But do that first, get it out of the way. Okay, so now let's talk about stitching our strips together. All right. Now remember, your strips will be different sizes depending on what project that you were doing. You can use this method for creating your strips for things like doing sashings and things like that as well. Okay, or your bias binding. So here's 2 strips, and these I think are 1.5 inches. So these are smaller ones. It's for a project that I'm working on. Now, if you have 2 strips that you need to put together to make one, Seems like our inclination would put them end to end. That would be easy, right? But is that how quilting works? No. We have to do something fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew them on a diagonal, so that way when it opens up, I went the wrong way. If you do a diagonal this way, when you open it up, then you have your strip, but then the seam is on a diagonal, so you don't have one big lump. Otherwise, you have a speed bump when you're sewing. You get all those layers upon layers all in one spot. But if it's on a diagonal, it offsets that weight. Okay? All right. So now what you can do, there's a couple things you can do. If you are wanting to do a diagonal line, you can do that on your rulers. You will have like a 45-degree line. And to utilize that 45-degree line, I need it to go this way. You can line up your fabric edge with that 45-degree line, and then you can simply draw your line, and then you have a nice line, and then you can use that to stitch on. Okay, I actually do something a little bit different, and so I'm going to show you this way, and that is I use the markings on the machine. So if you can see here, I have my needle in center needle position. That's important for this particular thing. And then I have this nice line that's on my bobbin cover. This machine and several machines come with two separate bobbin covers. One has nothing on it and one has the markings on it. And then you'll notice on the needle plate there is a 0 right there. I don't know if you can see that. It's really tiny. Do I need to turn the light down a little bit? It's probably too bright for everybody, isn't it? So let me get in here and turn that down. Light. Light. Okay. Maybe you can see the 0 now. Okay, so now what I do is I'm going to take my fabric that I want to start out with, and I put it this way. This is how I do it. Then I take this piece and I cross over. Okay, and I have it so it is at a 90 degree. Can you see how it's like a Lincoln log? It's kind of all nice and square there. And I will put a pin in it just to hold it in place. At home, I don't normally pin too much unless I'm feeling particularly crooked, and then I will pin. Okay, so now I have my nice little 90-degree corner. I don't care that these guys over here are hanging out. In fact, I like that because what that does is that gives me the ability to see right where I want to stitch. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle down, because remember my needle's in center needle position. And I'm going to scoot this little V right up into the needle. So it's going to hold that right there. I'm going to scoot it up to the V, and it's touching, so I'm good. I don't want to push so hard that I make a buckle. I just want to touch it. Then I'm going to kind of angle my fabric until I find my 0. There's my 0 right there. So that's where I'm aiming my other V. So now I have that nice and straight. Does that make sense? Now, I'm going to go ahead and stitch this. And I'm going to take my pin out. That one I don't have to take out all the way because it is not in the way. But notice how my V is right on that line. So now I know that I'm doing good because I can use those markings on the machine. If you have, you'll be able to see your markings on your machine much better than the ones that I have here because you'll be sitting close to it. Now, another thing that you might have on your machine is the projected guidelines. So let me go over here and I'm going to turn off the second line and go back, and let's move our red line back to center needle position because it is not on. Well, fine. Well, anyway, you get the idea. I'm not going to fiddle with it, but you can align this so that way you have your line lined up right there and you can sew right on it. Okay. All right. Are there any questions thus far? So I'm going to go around to the iron. Okay.
Comment said that a diagonal seam is more subtle to the eye, so it hides better.
Oh, that's very true. That is 100% true, because like think about if you had a floral pattern, if you ended right at one spot, it would totally look that way. Okay, so now here's how I cut this. I don't know if you can get in here, Carrie, but usually what I do is don't move, I'm coming back. Can you pretend this is the machine? Remember how I said I put this piece this way and I put this piece this way and then I stitch them, right? Well, then the next piece, I stop right here. My next piece, I run it the same way. This is how I know that I stay on track, is because my next piece I lay out face up from right to left. And then its next piece that goes to it comes up and joins like that, and then I stitch them together. So I end up with a chain of all these little guys stitched together, and then I can come back and I snip in between and release the chain. And then to trim this, I'm going to just come up the side there, come across, and then cut that guy off. And then you have your dog ears all cut off because they match up, because you were able to use the fabric as a guide. Okay, so I'm going to come in here now, and I pushed too hard. Remember how I said when you start out, don't push it in the needle, you'll make it buckle? I did that, so it doesn't match up perfect on one side, but that's okay. We'll be all right with it. So I'm sure you guys are a forgiving bunch today, right? Things like this never happen to anybody else, right? So then you have the continuous piece, all right? That was really easy. Okay. All right. So use the tools you have. I don't know if you've ever really looked at the marking tools that you have right there on your needle plate, but they can come in really, really handy. Okay, so now let's talk about another way to make bias. And this one is really a fun way, and it's new to me, but I thought it was really, really cool, so I want to share with you. I saw how to do this from a baby lock video with a gal named Chris Tryon. And she's really pretty smart and savvy, but you're going to love this. So what she was using her bias for was piping. Okay. And she has a certain color she uses a lot for pin tucks. So you can go watch that video and then enjoy that. But you can do the same thing for bias. So what you do is you have your straight of grain here, and I cut a section. It's about a yard that I cut here. Now just think about this. This is going to make a whole lot of strips, because remember we got 108 or something inches out of a fat quarter. This is going to make a whole lot because it's a whole yard. So keep that in mind. So she does this with a color she uses a lot for a lot of different projects, so she has it on hand. Okay, so you take it and you're going to open it up. And can you see the fold right here? Okay. So you're going to use this and you're going to do it like a paper airplane. I kid you not. So I have my fold right here, and I'm going to turn and fold my edge. You just want to make sure your edges are nice and straight. And look, here's our bias right here. And so then you're going to fold this edge in. And now you've got your point of your airplane. Then we're going to take this piece and we're going to repeat on the next side. And so we're going to end up with a diamond shape. Nice diamond, right? Okay. And then if you turn it this way, ta-da, you have a square. Okay. Now this is sticking out a little bit. I probably didn't fold that really well, so let's try it again. And let me put my hand here and see if I can make sure it doesn't flop open. Had the flippy floppies, that's better. Okay, so now we have our, this is all bias here. So you can simply take this and fold it up. And then you can start by trimming off. Make sure he's nice and square here. I'm going to trim off the fold right here. Just cut that fold off. And I'm lining up my ruler, one of the lines here, with my fold. Okay, so it stays nice and straight. So let me line that up. Actually, I'm going to get a shorter one. It's a little bit easier to cut shorter things with a shorter ruler. Okay, and then I'm just going to cut this edge off. And I want to look at my other side here and make sure that they're both straight, because I notice that this is the way it's fluffed. It looks a little crooked, but it's not. Okay, so here, whoops, did I leave him out? Okay. All right, so now we have a nice straight edge. So now if I wanted to make a 2.5, a 1 inch, or whatever size piece of bias I need, I can just cut that off. And a new blade is nice to have, a nice sharp blade. Goodness gracious. Again, a problem you never have at home. Okay. So now we have one nice long piece, well, 2 pieces. This I obviously didn't cut through all the way, but you've got bias strips. Okay. So now when you're ready to use this fabric again, you just come and cut another strip and another strip. So when you save this and you keep it at home, fold it up and label it as bias. So that way when you're ready to use it, you just unfold it and cut off the piece you need at the width you need, and then you're ready for your project. Isn't that cool? I mean, seriously, that's way, way cool. Okay? And I'll fix those, and I'm going to put them in there and keep that. Okay, now, are you ready for the next one? If you don't want to, that's fine. But Carrie, you're stuck. Carrie's doing the videoing today, and I think she's done, but too bad. Okay, so if you take a look at this, can you get in kind of tight, Carrie, and take a look. This piece of fabric, here's the fold, came right off the bolt. It's folded here, and I stitched all the way around the 3 sides. Okay, now stay there, Carrie, because now what we're going to do is we're going to come in to all 4 corners, and we're going to cut the corner off. And let me see, can you see okay there on that corner? I'm going to cut off the threads too. Look at that. I cut the corner off. Now this I learned from a gal on YouTube, and her YouTube channel is called A Square Pillow Is Not Square. And this is the magic way to make bias or something like that. So I have all 3 sides sewn, and I've cut all 4 corners off. Right? Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold this in half so we've got corner to corner. You may not match here, because if you didn't start with a perfect square piece of fabric, it won't match up, but that's okay. You just want corner to corner. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get into this corner right here, 1 layer only. You don't want to cut them both, 1 layer only, and we're going to come in here and cut just the 1 layer. So check this one out on YouTube. A Square Pillow Is Not Square, magic binding something. Okay, so now we have it open. We still have that fold, and we're going to take the opposite corners and give it a little shimmy shake, and look at that. Now we have our bias strips, our bias all done. Let me throw this underneath it. Should have started with this because this takes more time, poor Carrie. We love Carrie, though. She's a good videographer. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to try to be nice and quick with this. I don't know if I can be, though. So you're just going to press this open. This makes oodles of binding as well. And then we're going to do this other one over here. And of course, you would have trimmed off your selvage because you don't really want that in your seams, but it's there right now. And then we have 1 seam on the back. So one side has 2 seams, and one side has 1 seam. We'll press that open. You could leave it pressed to one side if you want to. In fact, let's just do that for time. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to straighten up our piece. I'm going to lay it along one of our pieces on our mat, and then I'm going to come in and I'm just going to clean this up. So we have a nice straight edge. Okay, gone. Now we're going to do our same thing where we're going to make our 2.5-inch strips, but the thing is, I want to come in about 6 inches. So there's 4, there's 6, and I'm going to draw a line. And this is going to go pretty fast. You're going to love this. So I'm going to use my Choco liner here so I can really see it. See how that's nice and bright? You can really see that? Okay, now I'm going to come in and we're going to make 2.5-inch strips. So I'm going to line up my ruler with my nice straight edge that I made, right? And I'm going to cut 2.5 inches all the way across and stop at my pink line. Isn't this weird? It's really, really cool though. Okay, just a couple more. Okay, are there anybody have any questions or anything while I finish cutting up this last piece? Let us know. You guys have been a quiet group today. Yeah, I think so. I think everybody is trying. And this last piece, I'm just cutting that whole thing off because I don't need that fold, right? Okay. All right. So now we have this wacky thing, and we just had a couple of strings get stuck. There we go. Okay, so there's that one, right here, and all my bulk. Same thing. Okay, so now I have an octopus, right? But this is where it gets really cool, because you're going to take this now and open it up. And it's best if you mark it, but I'm going to freehand it. So what you're going to do here is we're going to go from not straight across. We're going to go from angle to angle, offsetting. Remember, just like the other ones, we want to offset. Because if you went straight across, you would make a tube, a closed tube, and we want to make a continuous piece. So this is, the reason we left 6 inches is so that you have enough fabric length to be able to make kind of a nice smooth gradation there. And again, it would be even more better if you actually drew the lines. Okay, so here we come up. I matched that one. All right. So now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to just parallel that piece. And then we got to do the same thing down here. Here's where I ended there. So I'm going to come back here and just work my way to that piece. And now you'll see we have one big, long piece of continuous bias, all done in a very weird way that I had never seen it before I saw it on that video with the gal from A Square Pillow Is Not Square. She focuses on home deck, just in case you didn't catch that. Anyway, so I hope you had got some good information. There's lots of different uses for strips, whether they be bias or not bias. And the next time we're going to talk about how to sew it on. And we'll also be using specialty feet to sew it on. And then also the next one, we'll talk about attachments. So if you have any questions, let us know. But if you want to replay, just watch it on Facebook or YouTube. Okay, see you later.